Now we're going to hear from most of our other U.S. government speakers. So why don't we start, Mr. Joyce, why don't you lead the way for the rest of our government panelists, go around there to the step, and then we'll get started.
Good evening. I'm Rob Joyce. I'm from the National Security Agency, been with NSA about 34 years now. I am the Director of Cybersecurity. That's the half of NSA that's focused on securing the nation's national security system. So we do the keys, the codes, the crypto for all the classified environments, and we set the security standards for the nation's most sensitive information technologies. NSA is also a foreign intelligence agency. So that's the magic power we have, where we reach into foreign space and understand what our adversaries are doing, what they're creating, and the operations they're running. So that combination of both offense and defense is unique in the government. And you know, the phrase I use is, it takes a thief to catch a thief. We've been involved in both sides of those equations, informing, and people like me have gone back and forth across the membrane, and we found that really helpful. You think differently when you've sat in both chairs. So what are we focused on? I will tell you, if you heard any of the annual threats testimony with our director to Congress recently, it was very much about the China challenge. It is the pacing threat. It is the thing that we're all focused on. China is the only adversary that is both focused on achieving economics and military dominance, and they are investing and challenging us across multiple fronts. In my lane, it's significant because the Chinese intrusions into our networks have been prolific, right? Theft and stealing of the intellectual property of our companies has been a huge economic issue for our nation. But we're also seeing them do cyber operations. And if you look at the scope and scale of China, it's tremendous. At the same time, China is that pacing long-term challenge. Russia is a near-term issue. We're supporting and worrying about the Russia intrusions related to the war, and that includes everything from intelligence gathering on the battlefield to things where they look at the U.S. supply chains for weapons and lethal aid going over to support the efforts. And then finally, a lot of worries where cybersecurity has become national security with the criminal ransomware and other issues that have impacted supply chains, economics, and the livelihood of U.S. businesses. So throughout all that, we work with a number of partners, to include my partner on the left, Eric from CISA. So I'll hand off at this point.
Great, thanks, Rob. I'm Eric Goldstein. I am the Executive Assistant Director for Cybersecurity at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. So both my title and agency have too many words in them. Main takeaway. At the outset, thanks Maureen and Dimitri for having us here. This really is an extraordinary event. And I was reflecting as we walked in that I think I speak for Rob here as well, spent a lot of time talking to people in our field, preaching to the choir, if you will. And we don't actually spend nearly enough time talking to and learning from people in adjacent disciplines, adjacent fields that collectively are coming together to ensure the continued prosperity of our country. And so I think this is an extraordinary event. At CISA, we have a few different roles. I have the privilege of leading the cybersecurity organization, and so I'll talk a bit on tomorrow's panel about what we do to defend federal civilian networks and the nation's critical infrastructure. But at its core, CISA was created to advance the continuity and resilience of national critical functions under all conditions. And so, although the cyber threat is one that we are acutely concerned about, as Rob eloquently described, it's something that we'll talk more about, we know it's not the only way that our adversaries seek to undermine our continued growth and the values that all of us hold dear. And so I'm really excited over the next day or so to speak to and really learn from all of you to think through how does the cybersecurity risks we face intersect with energy security, with climate change, with supply chain security, with export controls, so we can actually bring all levers of American power and influence to ensure that we win the fight and ensure that our next generation, some of you met my little baby a few hours ago, that our children, our grandchildren have the benefit of the same sort of freedom and prosperity that we all do today. Thank you.
All right, my turn. Nicoletta Giordani, I'm the Director of Global Investment and Economic Security at the Department of Defense. Thank you for having me here at the Silverado Annual Summit to talk about economic security, foreign investments, and industrial-based policy. I'm really looking forward to share best practices and get ideas from our industry partners as we continue the conversation tonight and tomorrow. Because DoD is such a small organization and everyone understands how we're structured, I'm going to spend a quick second to kind of explain where my organization sits within the department. We are part of the industrial-based policy. It's a directorate, Assistant Secretary Directorate, that reports directly to the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition Sustainment, who reports directly to the Secretary of Defense. What is our mission? Well, our mission, in kind of a few words, is really to ensure the health and resilience of the industrial base so that we can meet our national security objectives and strengthen our economy. Without a healthy industrial base, we can dominate the battlefield. And so things that we focus on, predominantly, especially right now, is to really assess the health of not only the industrial base, but also our supply chain. And we do that through studies and reaching out to subject matter experts across the entire, spectrum of all the weapons and systems that we need, whether it's munitions, whether it's missiles, whether it's batteries or minerals, we cover the entire spectrum. We also look at the domestic market. So through our M&A organization under my portfolio, we also ensure that, for example, smaller suppliers that we care about don't get swallowed by bigger suppliers, and then we end up with single source suppliers, which obviously is another issue from a supply chain perspective. We promote, the health of the industrial base by strengthening our relationship with industry. We invest in areas that we care about through the Defense Production Act, and my colleague Anthony DiStagio will talk more about that in a minute. We also, engage very actively with industry through industry partnerships and with our allies and partners. We have signed very recently a number of security of supply arrangements where we get priority delivery on weapons and systems that we care about through our allies and partners in case we need to do so. And then lastly, we protect our critical technologies and our industrial base through the review of actions and activities that our foreign adversaries do through the use of adversarial capital. I represent the Department of Defense with the Committee of Foreign Investments in the United States, also known as CFIUS, and with the Teen Telecom Committee as well, where our foreign countries may submit applications for telecommunications licenses or undersea cable licenses, for example. So we get engaged on those reviews as well to ensure that we protect, our critical technologies and the systems and weapons that we care about. I think I was also asked to mention in which breakout sessions I will be included. So tomorrow will be in the semiconductor breakout sessions with Undersecretary Estevez and Adar Levy from Treasury. And I think I'm in another one tonight. I don't remember the name of it, but it has a blue star in the back of your badge.
My colleague will announce that at the reception for the follow-on salon discussions.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Anthony DiStagio. I think you're out there. The lights really haven't been this bright since I was in Oklahoma in high school. But for those of you that can see me, I am the director of also a new office in industrial-based policy called MSIP. So what funny acronym does that stand for? Manufacturing Capability Expansion and Investment Prioritization. What does that mean? Well, I'll try to tie it to our two initial sessions today. The first part of that is the first part of the Defense Production Act, which is the Title I authorities. where we partner quite heavily with Commerce and Mr. Estevez's team with weekly phone calls to set the prioritization for parts and pieces to be delivered within the domestic United States, as well as Ms. Giordani mentioned, through our security of supply arrangements with other countries. The second part of that is the investment part. The Defense Production Act Title III authorities is really the lever that we can pull for trying to incentivize things. So tying that to the second panel, where a very small part of our investments were mentioned related to batteries: lithium, nickel, cobalt, manganese, graphite. We have our investments now tied to 5 major areas. A couple of are going to be focused on over the next 2 days, microelectronics being one, critical minerals and materials being another. Thank you for the handover. One of them is select kinetic capabilities, where we have all of our hypersonic weapons investments. Another one, thank you again for the handoff, is onshoring chemical production from China, where we just closed a call for 27 chemicals that are needed for weapons. The last piece of the office that was kind of all pushed together is the industrial base analysis and sustainment investment area. So we have basically 2 investment portfolios and one, I'll call it a semi-lever because the DoD has some authority, but if anybody gets real out of line, we just call Commerce and call in the sledgehammers on that one. So that's what I'm here for. I'm going to be around, obviously, later today, and I have breakout sessions today and tomorrow, critical minerals and materials. And with that, I just want to thank you all, and I will tell you that industrial-based policy did not specifically send D'Estasio and Giordani because it was the Coppola Vineyard. We didn't.
Go ahead, David.
Terrific. I'm David Livingston. I'm a senior advisor and managing director for energy in the Office of the U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate. So there's also a new office, or at least a reconfigured office. It's obviously the special envoy is John Kerry, who all of you will be familiar with, and I will just say, far from being a departure from everything else that's been discussed, including by Congressman Curtis, and what an honor and a privilege it is actually to hear him talk about how he thinks about the energy transition and how to sustainably engage in the energy transition, because I think his remarks could take the place of my own, honestly. I mean, the amount of actual alignment we have in a pragmatic approach that can deliver security, affordability, and decarbonization in a sustained manner on the back of a industrial base that we share in our country and with our allies is, we believe in exactly the same thing. Let me just make a couple of comments on sort of how we think about this and why this is so. In my opinion, I'll speak just for myself, not necessarily for any official administration policy, but I'll just say that the observation I have over the last 2 years of doing this job is that we are truly in the interregnum in the international sphere between climate cooperation and climate competition. And when I mean the interregnum, I mean we are literally between 2 different paradigms, and we have an architecture that's largely oriented towards the former, climate cooperation, but we have many emerging realities and policy formation that's oriented around the latter, climate competition or clean energy competition. And we're going to be living with these 2 realities for quite a while. And it requires us to be nimble. It requires us to be highly pragmatic. We cannot be ideological. We have to be informed by facts and data as it comes to us, not just on the climate science, but also on the realities in the markets that we're engaging in, and the markets that must sustain the sort of decarbonization that we need to see. When you look at the alignment between actually what we need to do for our climate goals and what we need to do for our energy security and mineral security and industrial policy goals, it's striking how aligned these actually are when you look at the data, you put aside the ideology, and you engage with the world as it is. In most 1.5 degrees C scenarios, in the materiality of the energy transition, in other words, the materials that we need to deploy the clean energy that will be necessary to achieve that 1.5 degrees C scenario, the single largest source of emissions is polysilicon production. 25th to 75th percentile in the studies that I've seen look like something between 7.6 and 24 gigatons of CO2 equivalent from polysilicon production. Compare that to a range of different critical minerals, so nickel, manganese, cadmium, gallium, et cetera, that together, all combined, add up to less than 1 gigaton CO2 equivalent. So that tells you that the clearest and cleanest path to decarbonizing the materiality of the energy transition in those supply chains is to move away from a coal-dependent, forced labor-dependent supply chain that runs through Xinjiang, and to bring that polysilicon production back to the United States, back to Europe, and back to other allies and partners that have cleaner production, either on a natural gas or a natural gas plus renewables and clean energy or nuclear and geothermal grid, adhere to higher labor standards, and are willing to engage in free and fair trade without threatening the restriction of those, the export or free and flow of those materials. One other thing I'll just note, we completely agree, and I know that my boss agrees, someone who started his career off as anti-nuclear, I mean, literally built a career as an anti-nuclear activist or you know, an anti-nuclear public figure in Massachusetts, is now an absolute believer that the only path to achieving the climate goals that we must achieve runs through nuclear energy. I was very proud to work with him, to have him shake the hand of President Iohannis of Romania, to see Romania set a target of becoming the first country outside the United States to deploy an SMR, a small modular reactor, by the end of this decade. I hope that I'm gonna have the chance to go over to Bucharest in May to help inaugurate the first small modular reactor simulator outside the United States, which is going to be located in Romania to help train Romania's already impressive nuclear workforce on US small modular reactor technology, largely new scale, but there will be some interoperability there, in preparation for the deployment of that SMR in Romania by the end of this decade. And finally, to Congressman Curtis's point, I'll just say, not only is this opportunity about coal to SMR conversions ripe here in the United States, but it's also an enormous opportunity throughout Central and Eastern Europe. We've put together a program that Secretary Kerry actually announced and launched at the last year's climate conference in Egypt called Project Phoenix, which is basically will fund a range of different feasibility studies for countries throughout Central and Eastern Europe to look at doing the analysis of what it would take to convert coal sites, which will be decommissioned, use the existing foundation, environmental permitting, and transmission infrastructure so that we can put SMRs, hopefully American-made SMRs, onto those sites throughout Central and Eastern Europe and help maintain a workforce, piggyback on existing infrastructure, and put down new clean baseload technology that will help to sustain our allies in Europe in a secure, affordable, and clean way for many decades in the future. So hopefully I am boring you by just repeating a bunch of points that you also hear from a Republican member of Congress, but I think that is a refreshing sense of boredom and source of boredom rather than the opposite.
Wow, David, thank you. And I don't need to remind everybody that we're bipartisan at Silverado, and this is no better example than this. You know, good ideas shouldn't be a partisan issue. Anyway, thank the government panel. What I'd like to do now is invite you all to go attend the Google-hosted reception, which is out in the courtyard where the clear tent is. If you don't know what that is, it's in the front where you came in. Please have us, go up and introduce yourself to our guests here. Remember that the reception and the following reception are private conversations. Just throw that out there, but please, let's go.